I thought the last train home would be a quiet ride, until a stranger's music made me question everything. Hi, I'm Liam, and this is the story of a journey that changed my heart forever. I've always been the kind of person who thrives on routine, someone who knows where they're going, what they're doing, and why. At 30 years old, I'd built a life that looked perfect on paper. A successful career as a lawyer in Seattle, a sleek apartment in the heart of the city, and a schedule that left little room for surprises. But beneath the surface, I was hollow. I'd spent years burying my emotions, focusing on work to avoid the parts of myself I didn't want to face. Relationships? They were a liability, a distraction. I'd learned that the hard way 3 years ago when my ex, Daniel, walked out of my life without so much as a goodbye, leaving me with a broken heart and a vow to never let anyone get that close again. That's why I was in a small town 2 hours outside Seattle that Friday evening, wrapping up a case for a client, a property dispute that had dragged on longer than it should have. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that bites at your fingertips, and I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, pour a glass of whiskey, and lose myself in a legal brief until I could forget the day. But I'd missed the earlier train, and now I was stuck waiting for the last one. The platform nearly empty except for a flickering street lamp and the faint hum of crickets in the distance. I adjusted my coat, the collar turned up against the wind, and glanced at my watch. 9:47 p.m. The train was due in 3 minutes. I was already mentally mapping out my evening, a hot shower, maybe some takeout, if I could muster the energy to order, and then bed. That's when I heard it, a soft, melodic strum of a guitar, the notes cutting through the quiet night like a whisper of something alive. I turned my head, my eyes landing on a young man sitting on a bench a few yards away, his fingers moving deftly over the strings of a weathered acoustic guitar. He looked about 28, with tousled blonde hair that fell into his eyes, a scruffy jawline, and a faded leather jacket that had seen better days. His boots were scuffed, his jeans ripped at the knees, but there was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible to look away. He played with a kind of effortless grace, his voice low and raspy as he sang a song I didn't recognize, something about chasing dreams under a sky full of stars. His music felt like a warm breeze on a cold night, wrapping around me in a way that made my chest ache with a longing I couldn't name. I should have ignored him, kept my focus on the train tracks, on my plan, on the life I'd so carefully constructed. But instead, I found myself walking toward him, my polished dress, shoes clicking against the platform, the sound sharp against the softness of his music. He looked up as I approached, his fingers pausing on the strings, his hazel eyes meeting mine with a curious, almost playful glint. "That was beautiful," I said, my voice sounding stiffer than I'd intended, the words awkward in the open air. I wasn't used to starting conversations with strangers, especially not ones who looked like they belonged in a different world from mine. He grinned, a lopsided smile that made my stomach flip in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Thanks, man. I'm Caleb," he said, his voice warm, with a slight southern drawl that made every word sound like a melody. He set his guitar down beside him and patted the bench, an invitation I didn't expect. "Venez seat." Train's late anyway. I hesitated, glancing at the empty tracks, then back at him. Every instinct told me to say no, to keep my distance, to stick to my routine. But there was something about Caleb, his easy confidence, the way he seemed so at peace with himself, that drew me in. Against my better judgment, I sat down, the bench cold beneath me, the space between us small enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm Liam," I said, adjusting my tie, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place I must look in my tailored suit next to his worn-in leather jacket. "You're a musician?" "Yeah, sort of," he said, running a hand through his hair, pushing it back from his face. "I play gigs here and there, mostly small venues, bars, sometimes street corners if I'm desperate. I'm on my way back to Seattle after a show in town. What about you? You don't look like the small-town type." I chuckled, the sound surprising me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed so easily. "I'm a lawyer," I said, the words feeling heavy, like they carried the weight of the life I'd chosen. "I was here for a case, just trying to get home." "A lawyer, huh?" Caleb raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. Guess that explains the suit. You always this buttoned up, Liam the lawyer? His teasing tone caught me off guard, and I felt my cheeks heat up, a flush creeping up my neck. I guess so. I said, my voice quieter now, my fingers fidgeting with the cuff of my sleeve. It's easier that way. Keeps things predictable. Caleb tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, like he could see right through the walls I'd spent years building. Predictable's overrated, he said, his voice softer now, more serious. Life's too short to play it safe all the time. Sometimes you've got to let the music take you somewhere new. Before I could respond, the train pulled into the station, the screech of the brakes cutting through the night. We boarded together, finding a nearly empty carriage, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the worn seats. Caleb chose a spot by the window, his guitar case propped up beside him, and I sat across from him, the small table between us littered with old coffee stains and crumpled ticket stubs. As the train started moving, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks filled the silence, a steady beat that matched the pounding of my heart. Caleb pulled out his guitar again, strumming softly, the notes weaving through the air like a thread connecting us. He played a few songs, his voice raw and honest, each lyric cutting straight to my core. I listened, captivated, my carefully constructed walls starting to crumble with every note. "You're really good," I said when he finished a song, my voice genuine, a warmth in my chest I couldn't ignore. "You could be playing in big venues, not small-town bars." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe, but I'm not in it for the fame. I play because it's who I am. Music's my way of feeling free." "What about you, Liam? What makes you feel free?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, stirring up emotions I'd spent years suppressing. I thought about my life, the endless hours at the office, the cases that consumed my days, the empty apartment waiting for me in Seattle. I thought about Daniel, the way I'd loved him with everything I had, only to be left with nothing but pain. I thought about the person I used to be before I'd locked my heart away, before I'd decided that feeling nothing was better than feeling too much. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, my eyes fixed on the table between us. "I don't think I've felt free in a long time." Caleb set his guitar down, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table, his hazel eyes searching mine. "That's a shame," he said softly, his voice filled with a sincerity that made my throat tighten. "You've got this quiet strength about you, Liam, but I can tell you're carrying something heavy. You don't have to tell me what it is, but you don't have to carry it alone either." His words broke something inside me, a dam I'd built to hold back the flood of emotions I'd buried for so long. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away, embarrassed by how easily he'd gotten under my skin. "I'm not good at this," I said, my voice shaky, my hands clenching in a fist in my lap. "At letting people in. I tried once, and it didn't end well. I don't know how to do this anymore." Caleb reached across the table, his hand covering mine, his touch warm and steady, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said, his thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. "Sometimes it's enough to just be, to let yourself feel, even if it's messy, even if it's scary." I looked up at him, his face so close to mine, his hazel eyes filled with a kindness that made my chest ache. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as Liam the lawyer, not as the man who had it all together, but as the person I'd been hiding, the person who was still hurting, still longing for connection. And in that moment, I wanted to let him in, to take a chance on the messy, scary, beautiful possibility of something new. We talked for the rest of the journey, the hours slipping away like minutes. Caleb told me about his life on the road, the small towns he'd played in, the people he'd met along the way. He told me about his dream of recording an album, of sharing his music with the world, not for fame, but for the joy of creating something real. I told him about my life in Seattle, the cases I'd worked on, the pressure of being the best, the loneliness that came with it. I even told him about Daniel, how I'd loved him, how he'd left, how I'd spent the last 3 years building walls to keep anyone else from getting close. Caleb listened, his hand still on mine, his presence a quiet comfort that made it easier to speak, to let the words spill out like a confession. He didn't judge, didn't push, just listened, his eyes never leaving mine, his expression soft and understanding. By the time the train pulled into Seattle, the city lights glowing outside the window, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd shed a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. But as we stepped onto the platform, the cold night air hitting my face, reality came crashing back. This was it, the end of the journey, the end of whatever this was. Caleb had his life, his music, his freedom. I had my cases, my routine, my walls. We were from different worlds, heading in different directions. I guess this is goodbye, I said, my voice tight, my chest aching with a mix of gratitude and regret. I wanted to say more, to tell him how much this night had meant to me, how he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. But the words wouldn't come, stuck in my throat like a stone. Caleb looked at me, his hazel eyes searching mine, a small smile playing on his lips. "It doesn't have to be," he said, his voice soft but certain. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper and a pen, scribbling something down before handing it to me. "That's my number. I'm in Seattle for a few days, playing some gigs. If you want to grab a coffee or just talk, I'd like that. I'd like to see you again, Liam." I took the paper, my fingers brushing against his, the warmth of his touch lingering on my skin. I looked down at the number, the ink smudge from his hurried handwriting, and felt a spark of hope ignite inside me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that, too," I said, my voice steady now, a small smile tugging at my lips. He grinned, that lopsided smile that had drawn me in from the start, and then he picked up his guitar case, slinging it over his shoulder. "Good night, Liam the lawyer," he said, his voice teasing but warm, his eyes lingering on mine for a moment longer before he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there on the platform, the piece of paper clutched in my hand, the city lights shimmering around me, the sound of Caleb's music still echoing in my mind. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a choice to keep my walls up, to stick to my routine, to let this moment slip away, or to take a chance on something new, something real. And as I walked home through the quiet streets of Seattle, the autumn air cool against my skin, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to call Caleb. I wanted to see him again. I wanted to write a new chapter, one where I wasn't afraid to feel, to love, to be free. And that's the story of how the last train home changed my heart forever. If you loved this emotional gay story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next story.